Chapter 1. Letter. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Inside a manor, a young and handsome man was reading a book while sitting on a chair next to a fireplace. This young man looked to be in his 20s and had a very handsome face. He was tall, about 180 centimeters, with black hair and blue eyes. He had an angular face. To be precise, he had a face that solicited trust in others. However, this young man's eyes betrayed the kindness that his face displayed. Deep in his eyes were a terrifying calmness, a calmness that bordered on indifference to anything and everything, even human lives. While the young man was reading, he suddenly raised his head and looked through the window. There, he saw an owl a few meters away rushing in his direction. He waved his hand, then the window opened. A few seconds later, the owl entered the cozy room with a letter in his mouth. The young man snapped his finger, then a few pieces of bread appeared on a table at arm reach from him. While the owl gorged itself, the young man opened the letter. Dear Mr. Edward Bones, we are pleased to inform you that you have passed the first review to become a professor at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. However, a final interview with the headmaster is required before a final decision can be made. This interview will take place 3 days later on July 7, 1991. Please send a reply indicating your attendance on said date. Yours sincerely, Professor Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. Edward sighed after seeing this letter. It has been more than 17 years since he transmigrated into this world. At that time he was only 6 years old. After going through the shock and grieving process of his death and reincarnation, he was quick to discover that he was in the Harry Potter's world. Luckily for him, the moment he transmigrated was also the moment his magical power rioted. However, he soon learned that he was born more than 17 years before the start of the story. Edward was very happy with this fact, as this meant that he had plenty of time to grow stronger. Of course, that was if he could survive the First Wizarding War while being a 6-year-old toddler. After taking a brief stride towards memory lane, Edward took out a quill to reply back. Once the owl was finished eating, Edward placed the letter in his mouth and watched him fly away. 3 days later, Edward put on a muggle suit that he had personally tailored for him with a cloak on. Then, he instantly apparat from his home and appeared at Diagon Alley. While walking in the crowded alley, Edward watched many crowds going in and out of many stores. His eyes stood for a brief moment of 2 particular children. They each had a strange object attached to their wrists. Then, these 2 children would place a card on the object in their hand, following which, different kinds of monsters would appear after they each took their turns playing the cards. What these children were playing was actually U.G.I.O. dueling cards invented by Edward himself. The game has become widely popular in the wizard world among both children and adults. Official competitions have already been conducted, and even an international one was held 2 years ago. After only taking a brief look at these children, Edward headed to one of his stores. However, before he could enter, he encountered a woman that was exiting the store. The woman looked at him briefly before screaming out loud, "You're Edward Bones." The scream was so loud that all the people around stopped walking to look over. Then, they all became excited after seeing him. The woman started to talk rapidly. "It's really you. I can't believe I met Edward Bones, the receiver of the Medal for Magical Merit for being one of the most outstanding graduate of Hogwarts, the receiver of the Barnabas Finkley Prize for exceptional spell casting at the age of 14, the Gold Medal for ground breaking contribution to the International Alchemical Conference in Cairo. You have also the youngest receiver of the Order of Merlin, first class, the youngest person to receive the title of Grand Alchemist. Many people said that you will be the next Dumbledore, if not more powerful than him. Oh Merlin Beard, not to mention your accomplishment as a potioneer. On behalf of women all over the world, I would like to thank you for the ageless potion. If only the effect lasted more than 6 hours. Madam, you need to calm down, replied Edward while secretly sighing. If he knew that this would happen, he would have used the Floo powder instead. Oh, I'm sorry. My children often say that I talk too much. Speaking of my children, they all have collected your chocolate frog card. Even my husband does the same thing. Wait, my husband is here and would love to meet you. Furthermore, he has a camera with him. Do you mind if we take a picture together? The woman did not wait for Edward to answer as she ran as swiftly as possible inside the store and returned with her husband. Then, in front of countless people watching, Edward has to take pictures with the woman and sign a few of his books. Using the excuse that he had an important meeting, he left the crowds that was rapidly increasing and met with the clerk. Chapter 2. The Interview. 1. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After Edward entered the store, he had a brief meeting with the store clerk to review the sales in the past few months. Well, the result was as good as before, if not better. The ageless potion that he created is actually a money printing machine. The purpose of this potion is to actually revert a woman's face or visage back to a younger age of their choosing. This potion allows older women to return to their youth, while younger ones can remain at a certain age for a longer period of time. Adding to that, this potion has some beautification effect. Using it is like having a permanent social media filter from his past life. Of course, this potion has restrictions. It cannot increase the lifespan of anyone that drinks. It only lasts 6 hours before someone has to drink another dose. Overuse of the potion can build resistance. However, Edward invented another potion that clears out the build-up resistance. With a monopoly in these two potions, plus the U.Gi.O dual cards and discs, Edward is a rich man in the magical world. Of course, he did not do all of this because of his family circumstances, but because he needed a lot of money for his research and experiments. After checking that everything was alright with the store, Edward used the Flo powder to teleport himself to Professor McGonagall's office. Then, he saw the green robed waiting for him. Professor McGonagall, it's been a while since we met, said Edward with a smile on his face. However, the professor did not respond with a smile of her own. 5 years to be exact, Mr. Bones. No one has seen you for more than 5 years. If it was not for the few scattered letters that you send, many people including me would have thought that you were dead in a dark corner of the world. Professor, you should have more faith in me. I think few things in this world can actually send me off this mortal coil. That is not the point, Edward. You suddenly vanished after graduation. Many people were worried about you. Edward, still with a calm smile on his face, responded in an apologetic tone, well, there is a reason for my absence. First, I got lost in my research. Then I got myself into a little trouble. I am well aware of how engrossed you can be when doing magic research. However, that is still not reason enough to behave in such a manner. As for your so-called little trouble, I do not believe that anything that can cause you trouble to be of such insignificance, replied McGonagall as she directed him towards the headmaster office. After spending the entire journey apologizing to her, they finally arrived in front of the headmaster office. After the vice-headmistress used the password, Edward saluted her before entering in. The first thing that he noticed inside the room was the Phoenix Fox. He approached it to play with it. So, Fox, have you thought about my proposal to abandon the professor and become my companion? I promised you that your life will be much better in the future. Not interested, replied the Phoenix with a nonchalant look. An answer which was nor surprising to Edward. It truly is a fascinating spell, isn't it? Suddenly rang a voice in the room. Nature's voice, allowing the user the ability to communicate with animals. Honestly speaking, I believe that this is one of the best spells you have created. Professor Dumbledore, replied Edward as he turned around to face the headmaster. You looked as healthy as ever. Thank you. Do you want the usual? If you do not mind. Then, with a wave of the professor's hand, a cup of tea appeared on the seat opposite him. After sitting down and enjoying their tea for a few seconds, Dumbledore looked up and down at Edward with his deep eyes under the small glasses. Has he already reached that hurdle? He thought secretly to himself. This is faster than me and Gellert, and even faster than Tom. After secretly sighing to him, Dumbledore then asked, "So, Mr. Edward Bones, where have you been the past 5 years?" After taking a sip of his tea, Edward replied, "After you refused my application to be a professor at Hogwarts, I followed your advice. I traveled the entire world. I went to the United States, visited the Amazon forest in South America, toured the pyramids in Egypt. I even went as far as visiting the Soviet Union and China. And I did not only visit the magical side of these worlds, but the Muggle side as well." As a matter of fact, Edward lied, or did not tell the whole truth. He did indeed visit all these countries, but it was not for a vacation. No, it was to steal knowledge. You could say that in the past 5 years, Edward became the greatest international thief in both the magical and Muggle world, leaving countless legends both true and false. Chapter 3. The Interview. 2. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After transmigrated to this world, Edwards was also granted his golden finger, however his was not some system or mysterious object. It was a perfect memory that allowed him to remember every single thing as long as he focused his mind. His golden finger was essentially the same thing as the mindscape that he has seen in so many fanfictions of his past. However, his was innate. Another golden finger he has was his overwhelming talent for magic. Like Voldemort, at 6 years old, he could easily control and use magic as if it was a part of him. Whether it was floating things, making them disappear, or lighting things on fire, he could easily do them. Not to mention his overwhelming understanding or comprehensive abilities. Edward could easily learn most spells after reading about them and practice a few times. Magic was natural to him as breathing. However, Edward still had to face some problems when he first transmigrated. One of which was his parents. It turned out that he was born in the midst of the First Wizarding War. A time where Voldemort's strength was at an all-time high. Wizards and their families were dying every single day. Things turned worse for Edward when he realized that his father was Edgar Bones, the brother of Amelia Bones from the original story and a close member of the Order of Phoenix. Edward knew that his father, mother, and him were fated to die in the war. So, he urged them to stop fighting and run away together. But his Hufflepuff father did not listen to him in the slightest as he continued to fight against Voldemort and his Death Eaters. Knowing that his life was at stake, Edward managed to convince his parents to take certain measures. For example, the Fidelius charm on their house. As for the secret keeper, Edwards chose the house. Elf, Momo. The reason for that was due to the fact house. Elves were extremely loyal to their masters and would rather die than reveal the secret. Another reason was that these guys had the ability to apparate and most anti-apparition of wizards are useless for them. Of course, this was far from the end. Edward's paranoia at that time reached its peak. He had his parents install many Muggle weapons in the house, then have them magically altered. So, if someone were to intrude in his house, not only would that person have to get rid of the protective enchantments, they also had to deal with a few Gatling guns. And just like that, Edward lived safely until it was time to attend Hogwarts. In the 5 years in between, he mastered all 7 years of knowledge before even entering school. In order to protect himself and his family, Edward was real quiet during his first few years of school. He did not want his genius to attract the attention of Voldemort. In order to be safe, he almost never went out. Even when attending school, he did not go through the train, but had Momo directly teleport him there. Unfortunately for Edward, at the end of his 2nd grade, he still received the news that his parents were killed during a confrontation with Voldemort. The irony of this was the fact that his parents died the same year that the Dark Lord died. After grieving for his parents, he went to live with his Aunt Amelia. Then, Edward no longer hid his talent. During his time at Hogwarts, he asked all the professors their understanding of magic and spells. After absorbing their knowledge and experiences, he started to make waves in the magic world. He invented countless spells, won countless awards. The Ministry of Magic then used his genius halo as a form of propaganda to distract wizards from the horror of the war they had just experienced. They packaged him as the next Dumbledore, and Edward lived up to the expectations. He won all the awards the headmaster won when he was young, and even some he did not have the chance to. As for Edward, he used his newfound fame to get in contact with some of the most knowledgeable wizards still alive. He communicated and exchanged ideas with them on a constant basis. After graduation, he wanted to come teach at Hogwarts, but Dumbledore refused him on the grounds that he was too young. After that, Edward started to travel the world. L.R.G. and his travel was not for sightseeing, but stealing. Using methods like Imperius Curse, Polyjuice Potion, and Human Transfiguration, he infiltrated all the magical schools in the world by impersonating some teachers. Then, he copied all the books in their library. And this method was not only used for those 11 schools. No, he did the same with all the wizard families that have a long heritage. And his grasp did not only reach England, but the whole entire world. Even the Muggles were not spared. According to history lessons, Edwards knew that many witches and wizards were hunted in ancient times. So, he theorized that many ancient magic books might be still in the hands of certain Muggle authorities. And he was right. After successfully sneaking into the Vatican secret archive, Edward discovered many real magic books containing lost knowledge. Of course, many of these books were also fake. However, even the fake books inspired him as they provided him with ideas or directions for creating new spells. Of course, during his years as a thief, Edward still encountered a few troubles. Certain people could not be controlled by the Imperius Curse and certain vaults needed specific bloodlines to open. However, this problem was solved by a Muggle flower called Devil's Breath. It allowed Edward to eliminate a person's free will and control them to do his bidding. After magically processing this flower, the ability intensified and Edward got away with it. As a result, in the past 5 years, Edward's knowledge has reached an unimaginable. He could even argue that his knowledge is on par with Dumbledore if not stronger. Only 2 things that he could think that he is worse than the headmaster. His experience in battle, and the amount of magical powers inside of him. Chapter 4. The Interview, 3, You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Headmaster Dumbledore nodded quietly after hearing this, then chewed on a piece of candy. So, what made you want to work at Hogwarts? With your abilities and all the honors or awards you have received, you have so many options. Whether it is to work for the Ministry of Magic or using your wealth to spend the rest of your life in comfort to study magic, you have so many options. So, why be a professor? The professor's deep blue eyes started to scrutinize Edward under his glasses, his gaze deep and penetrating as if he wanted to see through him, see through his soul. As for Edgar, he was very calm the entire process. He took a sip of his tea, looked at the professor in the eyes and replied. Noel.n, you know, I have always felt it very demeaning the way you always suspect or compare me to him. Always watching over me in case I became the next Tom Riddle. No, I should call him Lord Voldemort now. The room instantly became quiet, and the paintings of the former headmasters in the wall gasped while looking at Edward. Some of them, like Phineas, had a gleeful smile on their faces. As for Dumbledore, he was calmed as he chewed on a piece of acid pops without any expression on his face. Well, Edward, you cannot blame me for this. After all, you started rising right after Tom fell, and the similarities between the two of you were too much to ignore. You had the same unparalleled talent. In your case, your magical abilities even surpassed his at the same age. You had the same desire for power. Desire for knowledge, Professor, suddenly said Edward. I pursue knowledge, not power. Power is nothing but the consequence for my search for the truth. That may be true, but that did not change the fact that by the 4th grade, you were already considered a master of the dark arts, replied the professor with a deep and powerful gaze. As for Edward, He was calmed as he shook his head. My views on the subject of the dark arts is not to shun or fear it, but to understand its origins and essence. Dark magic is as much part of wizards as white magic. Although I understand that dark arts can influence the user's mind, precautions can be used to manage such side effects. Edward, it is a great form of arrogance to believe that a person can control such terrible and terrifying power without being lost by it, replied the professor with a little sadness in his voice. And it is a great ignorance to simply ignore a power that we know exists in this world, a power that will not go away and always remain a part of every wizarding society. Not to mention the impact and significance it can have on the world. Both positive and negative. A perfect example of this can be found during the Wizarding War. The Death Eaters used dark magic to terrorize the world by brutally killing many people. However, the war started to turn around as soon as Barty Crouch passed the law that allowed the Aurors to use the 3 unforgivable curses. Dark arts are not inherently bad nor any less harmful than white magic. In the end, it all comes down to the will and choice of the user. The room then became quiet again. The 2 people talking in this room are one of the most powerful and knowledgeable wizards in the world. As such, they each had their own ideas, will, beliefs and philosophies. So, it is not easy to change their mind. After a few minutes of silence, Edward looked at the window while saying, "You know, I used to be as ambitious as Tom, if not more, when I was young." "Oh, how so?" "Once, my dream or goal was to build a true wizard civilization. I would gather all the wizards in the world, pooled all our knowledge and resources together in order to push the civilization of wizards forwards towards a bright future. Then, we would explore the universe. Muggle scientists have already determined how vast the universe is and how our planet is nothing but a small piece of dust in a small solar system. They have started to wonder whether there are other life forms out there, what kind of other civilization exists in the cosmos." Edward took a sip of his tea, however, it had turned cold while he was talking. He waved his hand, then steam started to come out of his cup again. "After knowing about this, I started to ask myself the same question as them. Are there any wizards out there on different planets in the universe? And if so, how powerful are they? What kind of knowledge do they have? Is their magic different from ours?" Then, my dream was to slowly guide the wizards on this planet to slowly explore the stars and come in contact with these other civilizations. Maybe we could exchange knowledge and resources with them. Can you imagine how prosperous the wizarding world would be after having access to other civilizations? The world would enter a blooming age of progress. Countless wizards from all over the world would come together to create new spells, potions, and alchemy products. We would discover countless unknown magical creatures and plants. We would study the mysteries of time, space, death, and love. We would unravel the potential of the human mind, find the secrets of the soul, control the different energy and forces of the world, and leave our trail in the cosmos. Wizards would no longer be just ordinary mortals that have some special abilities, but long-living beings that pursue the truth and laws of the world. And things did not stop there. According to Muggle scientists, there are countless dimensions and other universes that possibly exist out there. According to them, some of these dimensions are simply beyond human understanding, or have laws that are completely different from our own. These Muggle scientists cannot truly prove the existence of these dimensions or universes, but magic can. After all, we wizards have found ways to travel through both space and time. As long as we study these spells and modify them, who can say we could not find the existence of these dimensions? Then, the footsteps of our civilization will not only spread through the stars, but also across multiple dimensions. Chapter 5. The Interview. 4. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The room became silent after Edward's grand speech. Whether it was Dumbledore or the painting of the headmaster, they all started to imagine how beautiful such a prosperous world would be. Wizards would truly become powerful beings that control the world, or multiple worlds. They would have long lives to pursue their dreams and goals, and they may even eventually conquer death. Huh, Edward, only a noble pure blood like yourself could create such a beautiful world, suddenly said Headmaster Phineas Black. However, Headmistress Dilys Derwent gave him a cold look, but he ignored it. Noble family, replied Edward. In the world I envisioned, the concept of a noble family would have existed, but not because of bloodline. No, it was simple based on abilities and achievement. If a wizard is powerful enough and contributed enough to the wizarding world, of course he would be granted wealth and noble status. However, if his descendants are mediocre, then they would only be privy to the wealth and heritage of their families. No power or status would be granted after more than 3 generations. If the descendants do not meet a certain requirement. Although Phineas was a little sad about this information, he could still accept the fact that noble families would still exist in this utopian world. As for the other portraits, they looked at him with gleeful smirks. As for Dumbledore, he had a slight surprised look in his eyes after imagining the world that Edward envisioned, then he soon calmed himself down and looked at it from a critical point of view. The making of such a civilization will never be peaceful, and would be followed by blood and war. Not to mention how easy it is for wizards to lose themselves with so much power. And in a more realistic tone, what about the Muggles? How do they fit in your grand plan? You are right, Professor. The wizard civilization would have to commit countless atrocities to reach the level I envisioned, but tell me, what great civilization has not done such a thing in order to achieve their grandeur and glory? This is just an inevitable thing, replied Edward with a calm look on his face. As for the Muggle. Actually, they are one of the reasons that I gave up all my ambitions. What, you gave up? Asked Phineas. A few minutes ago, he was thinking maybe the future heir of his Black family might one day find a method to revive him from this painting. Although he would have to ask Edward to take care of his last bloodline and ensure that he has descendants. But he still had some hope. And it was not just Phineas that was surprised, many of the other portraits were too. However, Dumbledore was not. He took notice of the fact that Edward used the past tense when mentioning his ambitions, implying that they were no longer his goals. However, Edward just ignored the portraits as he continued to enjoy his tea. You know, I once started thinking about the future of wizards. Do you mind hearing my opinion? If you do not mind, replied Dumbledore with an intrigued look on his face. I believe that a war with the Muggle is an inevitable thing, and it will not be started by wizards, not if things remain the way they are. As Muggle science and technology continue to evolve, they will eventually discover wizards, then a war will take place. Unfortunately, I do not believe for a second that wizards have a chance of winning such a war. Nonsense, roared Phineas Black, full of fury on his face. And it was not just him, many other portraits had similar thoughts as him. Edward looked at the painting with a calm look. Do you know that Muggles landed on the moon more than 20 years ago? What does that have to do with anything? Asked Phineas with a frown on his already serious face. I'm saying this to tell you how advanced Muggle science and technology and the rapid pace at which they are developing. Now, let's look at us wizard. What was our greatest achievement in the past few decades? What major achievement that can change the world in the past few years? The only thing that I can think of is the Philosopher's Stone, however, that was created more than 600 years ago. Not to mention that the stone did not contribute to the wizarding world in the slightest. Muggles have already begun to explore the stars, while we still have laws from the Middle Age. For Merlin's sake, we have space magic, but we have not even reached the moon yet. Even worse, no one even had the idea of actually exploring the moon. Well, I'm sure that some idiot wizard once had the idea of reaching the moon, then took his broom to try to reach there and die in the vacuum of space. However, that does not count. All a wizard needs to do to win a war against the Muggle is to use the Imperius Curse to control all the higher echelons of the Muggles and use their powerful weapons against them, argued Phineas. That's not going to work as much as you think. It is common knowledge that any person with strong will can wake up from the Imperius Curse. Do you think that with the more than 7 billions of muggles, there will not be people with will strong enough not to be affected by the Imperius curse? So according to you, the wizard will come to an end after we lose the war to muggles? Suddenly asked one of the portraits. No, replied Edward while shaking his head. On the contrary, it's the opposite. After losing the war, wizards will start to flourish afterwards. Chapter 6. The Interview, 5, you are listening at novelfull.audio. How is that possible? If the muggles won the war, they would kill all of us wizards, exclaimed one of the portraits. No, you are wrong. After winning the war, the muggles will become curious about us, they would lust and envy our powers. Although this war would have proven that science and technology is no worse or even better than magic, their desires to become special or unique will get the best of them. As such, they will study wizards thoroughly. For a long period of time, I imagine that wizards will become nothing but experimental subjects, little lab rats in a laboratory. The muggles will try to find the source of power of our magical powers. I believe that they will succeed. It may take him some time, but they will eventually succeed. After that, they will want to grant such power to muggles. And I also believe that they will succeed in that endeavor. Then, a brand new group of wizards will rise from Muggle society. Let's call them Neo-Muggle wizards. These individuals will start to combine magic with technology, thus creating a brand new magical civilization. And with the large population of Muggles, even if only 1% of them can actually turn into Neo-Muggle wizard, the amount of wizards then will still be exponentially more than the current time. After that, the Neo-Muggle wizards with their advanced thinking from science and technology that will also explore the universe and countless dimensions, thus creating a prosperous age or civilization of wizards. Preposterous. Absurd. The very notion of your words is ludicrous, yelled Phineas Black, who seemed very agitated. All the other portraits had similar ideas as him, but they tried to remain calm. Calm down, Phineas, said Dumbledore, who was not as calm as he appeared on the surface. This is just a hypothetical future. There is no need to become so riled up. Phineas Black then looked at Edward with a fierce look, then closed his eyes and shut off his senses. Or at the very least, it appeared to be doing so. As for Dumbledore, he was a little shaken as this was the second time in his life that a powerful wizard warned him of the future danger of the wizarding world. His old friend had tried to use radical methods to deal with the problem, while the one in front of him seemed rather indifferent. Edward, you mentioned that this was one of the reasons that you gave up your ambitions. What is the other reason? Edward pondered for a few seconds before answering. It was because of my parents. After their deaths, I came to a realization. Voldemort did not kill them, but the wizard world did. Voldemort is a result of all the things wrong with our society. Whether it is the wanton discrimination or racism of those pure-blood theorists, the social inequality between Muggle-born wizards, half-bloods and pure-bloods, the backwards mindset of wizards for millennia, or the superiority complex of most wizards towards other races, both magical and non-magical. All these problems resulted in the creation of Voldemort, thus leading to the death of my parents. In my mind, the Dark Lord was not the only person that killed them, but the wizarding world. Why would I lead this kind of people to create such a prosperous civilization? Are they worthy? BDNVL. Then the room became quiet again. Many of the portraits had a complex look on their faces as they looked at Edward, and they sighed to themselves. As for Dumbledore, he also sighed before saying, I'm sorry, Edward, about your parents. However, I do not think you should judge the entire wizard world because of a minority few. There are plenty of good-hearted people in the wizard world willing to do good things. A perfect example is your parents. When Voldemort was in power, they rose to the occasion and fought for what is right. You may be right, Professor. But do not forget that the minority few that you talked about are actually the ones with all the power and influence in the wizarding world. The room once again entered a brief period of silence. As a matter of fact, Edward did not tell the whole truth. One of the main reasons that he did continue with his ambitions was because he realized that he did not really need the help of the wizarding world to accomplish his goals. With his talent and relentless pursuit of magic, he strongly believes that he will one day discover the way to travel through dimensions and other universes. After that, his journey through the sea of stars and dimensions will begin. He will pursue the path of magic until he becomes one of the most powerful wizards in countless dimensions and universes. His legend will spread throughout many realities, and he will be able to control his own fate. And the first step of his grand plan will begin after he acquires the Philosopher's Stone. This is one of the reasons that he decided to come teach at Hogwarts. Well, Mr. Bones, let's get back to the interview. So, for what reason you decided to come teach here at Hogwarts? I have had many great memories in this castle. In many ways, it is a second home to me, so I thought of coming back. Furthermore, I have been lusting after the books in the restricted area. Unfortunately, you always prevented me from entering there. Dumbledore just smiled before asking a few other questions for the interview, then Edward left. Dumbledore was left alone in the room with his thoughts. Then Phineas Black said, "What a scary guy." "What do you mean?" asked one of the portraits. "I do not believe for once that a person who can come up with such a goal and ideal to just give up like that. In most likelihood, he discovered a way to accomplish these things on his own," replied Phineas with a sneer on his face. Then, the portrait of Dilys Derwent asked, "So, what are you going to do, Dumbledore? Are you going to hire him?" Chapter 7. Material you are listening at NovelFull.audio. After Edward left the headmaster's room, he used the Floo network to return to a house he has in Hogsmeade. He did not want to go home yet as he knew that his aunt would reprimand him. However, he also knew that his arrival would be in the headline of the Daily Prophet tomorrow morning, telling all wizards of his return. In this world, Edward is almost as famous as Harry Potter himself. Later that night, Edward placed a hood himself, then apparat to a deserted mountain, waiting for someone. A few hours later, it was not one person that showed up, but 10 of them. All of them surrounded him. Edward calmly took out his wand. It was 14 inches long, made of oak wood with a sphinx core. With a wave of his wand, an invisible sword cut the closest person to him into half. This was Snape's Sectumsempra spell. All the other people were shocked by the sudden death of their companion. Then, all of them chant different incarnations, throwing more than 9 spells towards Edward's. However, he just waved his hand, then a semi-transparent shield appeared in front of him, blocking all the spells. Some of them were bounced back to the group. However, the majority of them managed to use the Protego charm to protect themselves, while the others moved out the way to dodge. Unfortunately for those who dodged, they were separated from the group. Edward took advantage of this situation. He turned into a cloaking shadow and disappeared from the spot and reappeared behind one of the separated groups. A red light appeared from his white hand, making it look like a lightsaber. With a swing of his wand, he cut the 2 people in front of him into 2 sections, leaving burning marks on their torso. Edward looked satisfied at this spell that he created because he was a Star Wars fan in his past life. While Edward was a little distracted, someone used the Avada Kedavra curse on him, thus a green light rushed towards him. However, he moved his body aside and dodged the attack. Then, with a wave of his hand, the ground turned into metal spikes that turned the person that used the unforgivable curse into Swiss cheese. At this point of time, Edward had already killed 4 people, which made the remaining 6 very nervous. One person decided to use apparition to leave this place. However, with another wave of Edward's wand, a powerful pulling force appeared and intervened in this guy's apparition. As a result, his head was separated from his body. Then, Edward tapped his hand in the air, following which, a strange vibration was released from his wand and blended in the void. Then, the remaining 5 people discovered that it was impossible to apparate and leave here. This was another invented spell of Edward after studying the anti-apparition enchantment in Hogwarts Castle. The 5 people, knowing that they were not a match for this single hooded wizard, decided to band together. Then, they all said in unison, Protego. A large shield appeared by combining the power of all 5 of them together. Edward frowned for a little after seeing this, then he said, Bombarda Maxima. Then, a powerful explosion was sent from his wand. The shield of these 5 wizards only lasted a few seconds, before it was blown to pieces along with them. Afterward, all that was left of these people were broken pieces of their bodies along with massive amounts of blood. Roberti, I know you are here, so show yourself, suddenly said Edward while looking in a certain direction. Following which, another hooded wizard appeared in the direction he was looking for. Edward Bones, my friend, it is nice to hear from you again. Roberti, if you do not give me an explanation, I can assure you that you will end up the same way as those wizards. My friend, you cannot blame me for being cautious. You have not contacted me for more than 2 years, then I suddenly received your letter. Edward sneered at these words. He knew how these dark wizards think and behave. If you show them any form of weakness, they will not hesitate to betray and devour you whole. You know that this is not enough to convince me. How about doubling the material? However, you do not need to pay extra. Consider it my way of apologizing, replied Roberti. Fine. Roberti then sighed in relief. Despite his calm fa.ade, he was extremely terrified inside. He spent so many years and resources training these 10 wizards to the level of Aurors. Adding on top of their proficiency in dark magic, they were more than enough to take on more than 15 ordinary wizards. However, they were all annihilated in just a few minutes, and effortlessly at that. After making sure that Edward accepted his proposition, Roberti waved his hand and 10 people appeared on the ground. However, these people were chained and also incapacitated. Edward walked to one of these people and pointed his wand at his head, reveal yourself. Then the person's head started to turn into a wolf, but before he could fully transform, he stopped. Then, he checked the remaining 9. All of them are werewolves that have committed many crimes and atrocities. You should be satisfied, right? No problem, replied Edward calmly. Then, can you remove your anti-apparition spell? So, Edward waved his hand to do so. As he watched Roberti disappear in front of him, he thought to himself, it's time to get rid of Roberti. He is starting to become a liability. After thinking that, Edward took a bag from his cloak, and with a wave of his wand, all the werewolves were sent inside. This bag was enchanted with an extension charm. Then, he placed his wand inside the mouth of the bag, Accio Roberti's hair. Then, a black string of hair appeared in his hand. Following which, Edward started chanting in a weird language while doing a strange dance. Then, he took out a white powder and blew it on the string of hair. A black shadowy-like smoke appeared on the hair, then it disappeared. This was a powerful voodoo curse that Edward learned when he one day accidentally teleported to Haiti in one of his magical experiments. It required strict preparations beforehand and a ceremony to take effect. He had anticipated that Roberti might cause him trouble in the future, so he prepared for the worse. Tomorrow morning, Roberti will be found with a look of horror on his face with his heart missing from his body. After that, Edward used his wand again, then a powerful acid appeared, dissolving all the bodies and the blood clean, not leaving a single trace. Then with another wave of his wand, he used another spell to prevent anyone from recreating the scene that appeared here. After finishing all of this, he apparat home. Chapter 8. Discovery 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After arriving home, Edward entered one of the rooms. This room had only a briefcase lying in the center and there were many protection enchantments around it. Then, he entered inside the suitcase, which had a very powerful extension charm. Just like Newt Scamander's case. Inside this suitcase was actually very large, with countless rooms inside of it. To be precise, this was Edward's laboratory where he did his magical experiments. After entering one of the rooms, Edward saw the 10 werewolves lying on the ground unconscious. As a matter of fact, these people were not the strangest things in this room. All over the room, there were many gigantic tubes with many creatures lying in a greenish liquid. There were dragons, hippogriffs, house-elves, vampires, mermaids, etc. And on the shelves, there were many organs of these animals lying on there. The reason for those things was because Edward was studying bloodline. So, he bought and captured all kinds of magical creatures, both normal and dark, and dissecting them. He basically treated them as biological experiments. Edward wanted to find what made these magical animals different from ordinary animals. He also wanted to find the origin of their bloodlines. At the age of 17, Edward reached a major bottleneck in his growth as a wizard. His magical powers stopped growing. A year before, he invented a potion that accelerated the growth of his magical powers. Then, in just a year, his magical powers reached the level of 25 times that of a normal adult wizard's. Then it stopped growing. The potion did not actually increase his magical powers, but just accelerated the rate that it grows until it reaches its limits. After reaching this limit, Edward thought that this was the highest level it could reach, until he realized that Dumbledore had a magical power 50 times that of a normal adult wizard. After discovering this, Edward did further research. Then he realized that 25 was actually a limit, and the most talented wizards can reach. And the majority have to spend all their lives to allow their magical powers to reach that level. However, his potions allowed him to reach that level at such a young age. However, the problem came. How did Dumbledore break that limit? And was he the only one? After turning into one of the guards, he made a visit to Nurmengard Castle and took a look at Grindelwald. And as expected, this first generation of Dark Lord also broke that limit and reached the level of 50 times the magical powers of a normal adult wizard. After that, Edward theorized that these talented people have found a way to break that limit. He guessed that Voldemort probably did it too and probably used the Horcruxes to break that barrier. He guessed that Dumbledore used the Phoenix Fox as a way to break that barrier, while Grindelwald might have used either the Elder Wand or some other method. As for him, he chose the path of bloodline to break that barrier. Edward theorized that the first wizards that ever existed was due to surviving an accident after ingesting the blood of powerful magical animals, thus granting them a bloodline of their own. BDNVL so, he believed that as long as he discovered the bloodline of wizards, then modified it, he could break that barrier and open the gate to a brand new world. In order to further his study, Edward stole a few technological machines designed to observe DNA. However, these machines did not reveal much information at time due to the low level of technology. So, he took drastic measures. He traveled around the world and contacted some of the most intelligent scientists and engineers in the world. Using force, coercion or even magic, he forced them to work together to invent the technology he needs for his research. He then secretly controlled some of the richest people of the world in order to fund this research. So with unlimited funds, access to all the rare resources in the world, the technology Edward needed was created in just 1 year. After entering his laboratory, Edward woke up one of the werewolves. The lad was confused where he was, however, he was easily controlled through a blood magic similar to blood bending of Avatar. Edward first took him into a white room separated by an observing glass, then with a wave of his hand, an alchemy product designed to give off moonlight shone on the werewolf. Then, Edward activated the machine that observed his DNA. Of course this was not the original machine, but one that was further modified by Edward through magic. He observed all the changes that occurred in this man's DNA, however he still did not find what he was looking for. With a wave of his wand, someone appeared in the same room of the werewolf. It was a muggle. Without hesitation, the muggle was bitten by the werewolf, however, he was separated from the wolf before he was ripped apart. Then, Edward watched calmly and indifferently at the changes in the muggle's DNA. The reason that he chose werewolves was because they were the few creatures that could actually change the bloodline of both muggles and wizards through saliva and blood. So, Edward believed that as long as he observed the bloodline transformation of any wizards or muggles, he could find the place the bloodline originated from and study it. Chapter 9. Discovery. 2. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Edward watched the Muggle transform into a werewolf. However, he did not feel magical powers from him, nor did he find anything in his DNA. He felt that he was close to something, but he could not discover exactly what it was. After pondering for a while, Edward went to the next room. This room was full of all kinds of potions. There were a few hundred vials, some were empty while the others had some sort of liquid on them, with the name of the potion written underneath them. After a few minutes of searching, he found a white vial with a molten golden color liquid and the tag, Felix Felicis, underneath. This potion was the liquid luck personally brewed by Edward himself. Without hesitation, Edward drank the potion. After feeling the unfounded confidence overcoming him, he smiled before returning to his research room. With a wave of his hand, another person appeared in the same room as the previous werewolf. However, this who appeared was in fact a captured dark wizard instead of a Muggle. After allowing to bite the wizard and separating the two of them, Edward started to observe the DNA structure of the dark wizard. This time, things went smoothly for Edward. Somewhere along the double helix, he discovered a very tiny magical energy, so he focused on that place to see what it was. However, the machine could not find anything. Edward's intuition told him that he found what he was looking for, but he could not see it. Then, he remembered that Muggles could not see some magical creatures like Dementors. So he thought that maybe the machine could not actually see what he was looking for. Although these machines were magically modified, it did not change the fact that they were technological base. Maybe what he is looking for is more metaphysical or spiritual. After figuring this out, Edward tried another method. He used all kinds of spells that are related to vision. Whether it was the supersensory charm or other charms that he created after dissecting the eyeballs of countless magical creatures. He placed all of them on him, then he concentrated on the specific spot that the machine first discovered. And then, Edward saw it. It was as if he entered a different world, and that world was full of unintelligible scribbles. There were all kinds of strange symbols, glyphs and pictures. It took him a while to really focus on these scribbles before discovering some sort of pattern. Then, Edward realized that these unintelligible scribbles were actually ancient rune language. He had studied it back in Hogwarts under the tutelage of Professor Bathsheba Babbling. Edward spent a great deal of time studying ancient runes as they were used in many ancient manuscripts, so he could write and read them fluently. Furthermore, some of the people he corresponded with on a regular basis are actually real scholars of ancient runes that have studied the subject for decades. After taking a few hours to translate the ancient rune, Edward was left with a complete shock with his discovery. What he discovered was something he referred to as life code, and as the name states, it is the fundamental code or engineer of the human body. It is divided into three parts: body, soul, and bloodline. The body part is essentially the DNA of a person, and it dictates everything about the human body. Hair, skin color, and other types of genetic information. As for the other two parts, they are self-explanatory as they dictate the composition of the soul and the kind of bloodline of a person. Edward became excited after making this discovery as he knew that he was really close to solving his problem of magical power. So, he focused more on the bloodline section of the life code. He discovered that Muggles also have a life code, but the bloodline section is empty, while the soul section has very little compared to wizards. Edward's mind started to revolve rapidly as he wondered how different the bloodline section of people like Voldemort or Nymphadora Tonks would be, as they are born with innate abilities. Edward knew that he could not get access to Voldemort's blood to study, but he could still get Tonks. As Metamorphmagus, her bloodline must be different from other people. Furthermore, Edward is still interested in the relationship between bloodline and soul. Voldemort's bloodline granted him the ability of Parseltongue, but Harry Potter acquired the same ability after a piece of the Dark Lord's soul entered his body. So, there must be a correlation. After reining in his thoughts, Edward then concentrated on the aspect of bloodline that deals with magical powers. The next problem that he faced was on how to actually modify this life code. Then, he suddenly thought of transfiguration, to be precise, human transfiguration. As this is magic that can transform the molecular structure of the human body from one thing to another, it should be able to affect this life code. With this newfound idea, Edward set out to test his theory. He first places the newly transformed wizard on a dissecting bench, strapped him off so he could not escape, then he begins his attempt. Things went much smoother than Edward anticipated. He instantly felt a connection directly to this wizard's life code, so he tried to modify one part in his bloodline. However, things went horribly wrong. The wizard started to scream, blood started to come out of his mouth, ears, and noses. After a few seconds of seizuring, he died. After checking his conditions, it turned out that his DNA collapsed and his life code became a mess. Edward frowned as he realized that things were more complex than he originally thought. With a wave of his wand, this wizard was sent to the disposal area, then he placed one of the werewolves he just bought in the bench and repeated the experiment. No matter how many of these experimental materials die, he will uncover the mystery of bloodline, and even of the entire life code. Chapter 10. Mind Soothing. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Soon, 7 days passed by. Edward looked at the dead wizards in front of him with a frown on his face. In the past week, he had killed all 10 werewolves he just bought, plus another 5 dark wizards he had in store. However, he made little progress. A thing like the life code is very complex, so modifying even a tiny part of it will lead to another chain of events that affects the other parts. As such, it is not an easy thing to modify at will. Nevertheless, Edward did learn a few new things. Especially about magic cores. Long ago, he had discovered that every wizard had a magic core that held their magic powers. According to his previous research, wizards had a few different shapes of cores, some were round, triangular, and cubic. And wards had a cubic-shaped one. As a matter of fact, even squibs have a magic core inside, however, theirs is inactive. In his previous study, he tried to transplant the magic core of one wizard into the body of another in an attempt to increase his magic powers. But, he failed after solving many difficult problems. The first of which was taking out the magic core. Just like the life code, the magic core was a metaphysical thing that could not be seen or accessed under normal circumstances. However, after discovering a way to actually taking out of the body and plant it in someone else, 2 things would happen. Either it was of no use and no effect would take place, or a powerful rejection would occur, leading to the death of the person who received the transfer. Previously, Edward did not know the real reason behind this rejection, but after studying the life code, he knew that bloodline did decide whether someone had a magic core. However, the core was also linked to the soul. As such, each core had the imprint of their owner. So, when it was transplanted in another person's body, this led to the severe rejection. After finishing his last experiment, Edward took a break as he did not have any more experimental bodies. And also because he ran out of ideas. If he continued like this, a lot of people would have to die before he actually discovered the intricacies of the life code, so he needed a better and more efficient way to continue his research. Maybe I should observe a pregnant witch, that way I can slowly observe how the life code of a baby is developed from its inception all the way to its birth, thought Edward to himself. However, he soon stopped his thought with a serious look on his face. He realized a problem with his mind or thinking. Although he is a person who is willing to go to extreme lengths for his research, he did not reach the level of experimenting on children. He still had a bottom line. So, the only reason he thought like this was because something was wrong with his mindset. Knowing this, Edward left his laboratory. After exiting the suitcase, he left his manor at Hogsmeade and Operaat to an alley in the Muggle world. After spending a few minutes searching for the information he needed, Edward then Operaat again. This time he arrived at a concert in London. Many Muggles were happily dancing and singing. Overall, they were happy while enjoying themselves. After moving to a corner, Edward took out his wand. Expecto Patronum, he said while waving his hand. A giant eagle burst out from his wand and flew into the sky. The wingspan of this eagle was actually 12 feet long. However, the odd thing was this Patronus was in fact invisible to all the people dancing. After the Patronus appeared, it soared in the sky, opened its mouth and did a swallowing motion. Then, countless silver lights flew from the Muggles and was swallowed by the Patronus. This was in fact a technique developed by Edward after studying Dementors. What the Patronus was swallowing was all the happy memories of these people. However, unlike the Dementors, it did not harm the Muggles. The Patronus just made sure that the happiest memories of these Muggles to appear in their minds, then it absorbed the positive energy. After finishing the absorption process, the Patronus became a few times larger than its normal size. Then, it returned to Edward and plunged straight into his body. Following which, Edward felt a profound and deep sense of euphoria, then all the negative thoughts in his mind seemed to wash away, his head became exceedingly clear. Edward knew that dark arts has the ability to negatively affect the mind of the user. Especially for wizards like him that pursue very deep knowledge of it. In order to ensure his safety, he modified the Patronus charm. Which is known as the Guardian Spirit. To protect him from the side effect of practicing dark magics. Although Edward can be cruel in his pursuit of magic, he was never a dark wizard, nor did he ever consider himself to be one. This was perfectly proven by the fact that he has the ability to perform the Patronus charm. In order to perform this spell, a wizard needs to remember happy memories in his mind, and Edward has plenty of these. Especially with his parents. Back during the First Wizarding War, his parents always made sure that he had a happy childhood despite the fact that they would leave every night in order to fight Voldemort and his Death Eaters. And after their deaths, his Aunt Amelia made sure that he had everything he needed. Despite the fact that she might seem very strict, that was only when it came to strangers and also a necessity to do her job. Furthermore, Edward made sure to enjoy his life. After all, he died once and he did not believe that he would have a third chance. Additionally, he pursues magic not due to power, but because it makes him excited. Every time he made a new discovery, Edward always felt a sense of satisfaction. It was as if the goddess of magic was in front of him, then he started to slowly unveil her skirts. Even if he manages to lift the skirt a few millimeters, it would bring him a sense of anticipation and euphoria as he believed that one day, he would see what is underneath. In conclusion, Edward is not someone that focuses only on studying magic, he often enjoys himself when given the opportunity. A perfect example of this was his 5 years traveling the world. He did not just steal a bunch of books and do magic research all day. No, he experienced different cultures, different foods, and different types of women. Overall, he enjoyed himself during travel as much as possible. After leaving the concert, Edward took a mirror and placed his wand on it, then he sent a message. "Are you available now?" "No, you can come by if you want," replied the mirror a few minutes afterward.